Vietnam is better than China, and today I'm going to tell you why. We're going to do a dissection and compare the two countries. You're looking at the global GDP growth and the relationships globally. From the immigration policies, no last-minute trips to China for sure, to the ease of doing business, still extremely open regarding using different platforms. The cost of living, Vietnam would be about $500, and the openness and friendliness of the people, they're very open to working with foreigners, and that's why we think Vietnam is better than China, so let's get started. Hello, my name is Ken Duong, International Business Immigration Attorney with over 15 years of experience helping American companies relocate, open factories in Vietnam, including doing research before you come, exploratory trips looking at industrial parks, suppliers, and the workforce, and also doing the legal work of setting up your entity, hiring your first staff, and also maintaining your business and tax implications. So the first point of comparison between the two countries are the immigration policies, especially right now after all the changes with. So in general, in order to apply for a visa for China, you would have to submit a lot of documentation such as what's the purpose of going, what kind of companies you're visiting, where will you be going, traveling, and staying. So that one will make it a lot harder to get the China visa in general. But now, with specifically after, we will compare the e-visa, or what's called the electronic visa. So first I'll talk about China. The China e-visa, from a processing standpoint, takes roughly about 6 weeks in order to get the approval. It can be done online, but that means that you have to actually plan 2 months in advance in order to plan your trip. Thus, no last-minute trips to China for sure if you need to visit a supplier, attend a trade show, or just for tourism purposes. And there are many specific criteria that will hinder your business and travel plans. And these conditions that China has imposed, one is that you have to have at least 2 people and a maximum of 10 people. 2, the e-visa is a single entry 30-day visa, so you can't go in and out of the country. 3, it is only by air travel, so you can't go through the border of Vietnam, Laos, or any other country in order to come into China. And 4th, the visa must be utilized within 15 days of approval, so you have limited time as well. Those are some of the conditions that are needed for the China e-visa, and now I'll compare the Vietnam visa. So now we're actually going to talk about the Vietnam e-visa. So the Vietnam e-visa allows you for 90 days, multiple entry, and it can be applied between 7 to 10 days, and there are 80 countries around the world that are eligible for the program. So this makes it a lot easier to come into Vietnam last minute, to travel, or to do business. Moreover, generally the immigration policy is if you're married to a Vietnamese, you can get a TRC. If you're working for a company, you can get a work permit as well to stay in Vietnam. And also there's an investor visa. So there are many options for short and long term in order to live, work, and retire in Vietnam. So those are the main comparisons between China and Vietnam's immigration policies. So the second comparison is that international multinational corporations have been leaving China for many years now due to various reasons. And one of them is regarding the anti-spy laws. China has been implementing many cybersecurity and also server requirements that allow the Chinese government to spy on, have access to, and look at information by foreign companies, including many companies that they have actually rejected and not allowed in the market, such as Facebook, Google, Amazon, and many of these other global behemoths. Just because of the anti-spying laws, these companies do not want to be in China. They've entered China, but then they've also left as well because they do not want to have access and do not want to give access to the Chinese government because you don't know what they'll do with the information. Due to this mounting pressure, the European Chambers of Commerce have also expressed their need to leave China, to move their manufacturing, to move their companies and their members outside of China So they're looking for other homes as well, and Vietnam might be a good place. Another reason why multinational corporations have been leaving China is because they are exhibiting a lot of nepotism, protectionism, and also measures that will only gear towards Chinese companies. For example, if you are a construction company or you're a technology company, you are forced to give preferential treatment to Chinese suppliers in construction, in technology, chip making, manufacturing, and in other sectors. This push of China towards self-reliance and nationalism of Chinese companies and individuals has caused many multinationals to want to leave. And then finally, as China continues to push towards self-reliance, they have implemented many measures, especially since 2012, when President Xi Jinping has been in power, where they're requiring companies to invest locally, to transfer of technology and IP to the local staff, and also manufacturing and reinvesting into the country rather than getting money out of the country. All of these measures are causing these foreign companies to not want to invest any further in China, and it is not an attractive destination as it used to be. Another comparison is regarding the labor cost between China and Vietnam, which is causing the big reason why manufacturing is shifting from China to Vietnam. The biggest reason is the US-China trade war that has caused increase in tariffs, import and export taxes between the United States and China. Thus, companies are moving their manufacturing to Vietnam. One is the average salary or labor costs for Vietnamese employees is around $2.90 per hour, versus in China has gone up to $6.50, which is almost 3 times as much as in Vietnam. Moreover, other supply chain and also regarding tax incentives and industrial parks has helped Vietnam tremendously in order to attract those foreign direct investments of factories. That's something that we do a lot here at Duong Global. So if you want to watch the video regarding how to open up your factory in Vietnam or how to identify investment opportunities in Vietnam in the manufacturing sector, then you click on the top 10 corner in order to watch that video. Another comparison between the two countries is regarding the opportunities. So Vietnam is a much better land of opportunity than China. If you look at some of the bigger cities or tier 1 cities in China, such as Beijing, Shanghai, Shenzhen, Guangzhou, and many others, they're already fully developed in the infrastructure, in the businesses, and also the opportunities. Whereas in Vietnam, it's still an emerging market and it's a lower developing country with roughly about 3,400 GDP per capita, which makes there many room to grow, many opportunities, especially in land, in factories, in manufacturing, and other upcoming industries as well. Another reason why China's infrastructure has developed tremendously in the last 10 years, where roads, bridges, airports are being built. Vietnam, unlike China, is only going through a phase of infrastructure development regarding their roads, especially in the south. In the north, the roads are much better, but here in the south, they're still undeveloped. So with the ring road infrastructure, whereby Ho Chi Minh City is right in the middle and it spans out all the roads and they connect with various ring roads, that is being built. There's already ring road 1 and 2, 3 and 4 are being built as well as the subway station and also the busing system. So all of that will help with supply chain, will help with development, labor force, and many other developing opportunities for foreign companies that come to Vietnam. With that said, Vietnam is attracting a lot of foreign direct investment, especially with factories and manufacturing. And that's the reason why Vietnam is still the land of opportunities as it continues to grow and the economic situation. So that's a comparison of the opportunities between China and Vietnam. Another stark comparison between the two countries is the social media acceptance or prohibition. So in China, it's called the Great Firewall, whereby the Chinese government has restricted or banned altogether many of the international platforms and social media sites such as Google, Facebook, even the messaging apps as well, WhatsApp, even Vietnam Zalo, or any one of the other major platforms that are used to connect people all over the world. So if you are working in China and you cannot connect to the world, you're forced to sign into a VPN every single time. That's going to limit your connectivity, or you're always constantly using social media by China. And of course, we all know that that's highly regulated and also looked into as well. In contrast to China, Vietnam, even though it's a socialist country, it's still extremely open regarding using different platforms, social media sites. So you can use Facebook freely here, Google search engine, Amazon. Also, Vietnam has quite a few of their own apps as well. It has Zalo for you to speak, and most of the people use that. You can use Telegram, you can use WhatsApp, or any one of the other messaging sites. This connectivity makes it much, much easier for you to only have a few apps that can connect you to the world. So social media is critically important for business as well. So personally and from a business standpoint, Vietnam is still much more open in your social media use. So did you know that Vietnam is a much more welcoming place for foreigners than China? For instance, China throughout the years have been implementing many specific measures in order to restrict foreign businesses doing business in China, also with many espionage laws, and also with working with foreign entities and also Chinese authorities to hamper many of the foreign businesses. In fact, roughly about 2 or 3 months ago, the Chinese authorities went into a big consulting company called Bain, which has offices all over the world. It's one of the biggest international consulting companies. And they looked through the paper, they worked with the employees, they viewed many documents, and also had threats to possibly shut down the operations as well, because they asked the authorities to look into the business and to see whether they can work together. The other example is in April, the Chinese authorities also went into the offices of Mintz, which is an international firm with 18 offices all over the world and thousands of employees. And after their rummaging and also looking through the documents, they determined that Mintz was operating unlawfully in the country and also shut down the operation. So with some of these non-discretionary closings or threats to the international business community, it's made it very difficult for international companies to trust the Chinese government and also for them to operate legally in the environment. Thus, it makes it very difficult and not that welcoming for foreigners. In contrast to that, the Vietnamese government is very open to having foreign companies and foreign direct investment into various spaces in Vietnam, especially in manufacturing, technology, and professional services. In fact, Vietnam is one of the countries that has signed the most free trade agreements and international multilateral agreements around the world, including the CPTPP, RCEP, ASEAN Free Trade Agreement, and also the EU-Vietnam Free Trade Agreement. So thus, Vietnam is open to the world and much more welcoming than China. So of course, Vietnam as a developing country, its GDP growth outperforms China. For example, in 2022, China's GDP growth was 5.2%, whereas Vietnam was 5.8%. And it was especially highlighted during the pandemic when China was growing only at 3%, where Vietnam performed exceptionally well with 8% GDP growth. Also impacting that GDP growth is the relationship of China to the world versus Vietnam to the world. Vietnam has signed many comprehensive agreements with Southeast Asia, with Europe, with its Asian counterparts, and also with the US as well, including the US-Vietnam Bilateral Trade Agreement, the CPTPP, the RCEP with Korea and many other Asian countries as well, where it's open. Almost 30 to 40% of its GDP is based on foreign direct investment and manufacturing, whereas China is really closed off to the world. It's warring against almost every other country, especially with the United States. In fact, since 2008, when the US-China trade war began, the exports of Chinese goods into the US market dropped dramatically, and has impacted the ability of Chinese companies to make a profit in the international market. And politically, China has been making enemies of many countries all over the world, and even with Vietnam itself. China is making claim to the 9-dash line, which encompasses two main islands, the Spratly Islands and the Paracel Islands, that does not belong to China, and it belongs to Vietnam. So politically, the world is not very happy with China's actions, including Japan, Korea, and many of the EC that is being impacted as well. So you're looking at the global GDP growth and the relationships globally. Vietnam is much more favorable in the international environment and eyes than China is. Comparing the cost of living advantages between China and Vietnam, roughly in Vietnam you can live for about $1,000 a month, including your living, your rentals, and your food, whereas in China it would cost at least $2,500. So 2.5 times higher than it is in Vietnam. Moreover, everything is a little bit more expensive, from the food to going out, nightlife, daycare, education. For example, if you have a meal, basic meal in China, it will cost you $30, as opposed to in Vietnam, it will cost you about $10. Or renting an apartment, it will average in Vietnam would be about $500, but in China it could cost you $800 to $900, almost twice as much as the cost it would be here in Vietnam. The cost of living for any business owners or their employees or expats living in Vietnam will be beneficial to the bottom line of the corporation, and also would give a better lifestyle to them here in Vietnam. So that's an advantage for Vietnam on the cost of living. For ease of communication, Vietnam is definitely a much more friendly place. The people are younger and they're much more open to international cultures due to the exposure to Facebook, YouTube, social media around the world. If you're in the city, you can definitely find a lot of the under 30-year-olds in Hanoi or Ho Chi Minh who speak English extremely well. They're very open to working with foreigners, and also they're very happy to learn English and continue to communicate with your executives or your foreign employees working in Vietnam. Whereas opposed to China, it's extremely difficult to find someone who speaks English well. Even hailing a taxi is almost nearly impossible in some of the big cities where you would think that people speak English. Due to a lack of exposure to the international community and outside world, it makes it very difficult to communicate with many of the Chinese locals on a daily basis. Therefore, the Vietnamese communication and also the language based on the Latin alphabet is much easier than the pinyin or the character symbol base of China. So you can walk around and still at least read the different signs in Vietnamese rather than in Chinese characters. With all that combined, it is much easier to communicate, live and work in Vietnam as opposed to China. So with that said, we've made the comparison between China and Vietnam, and there are many big differences and why Vietnam is still the better competitively to China. So we definitely thank you for watching this video, and we hope you kind of decide whether you want to invest in China or in Vietnam. And as always, make sure you like our Facebook page, subscribe to our YouTube channel, comment below what you think the comparisons are and whether they were accurate or appropriate. And of course, click on the bell for notifications. So thank you very much for watching this video, and I'll see you on the next one.